fantastic time to be around and to understand this. So let's understand a little bit more about the culture in Dubai and the Jewish, particularly the Jewish community. And tonight we have Rabbi Yehudah Sarna, who is Chief Rabbi of the Jewish community of the Emirates. I'm going to read a little bit about Rabbi Yehudah Sarna. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Rabbi, who is the Executive Director of the Bronfman Center for Jewish Studies at New York University and the University Chaplain for NYU. Rabbi Sarna has received numerous awards for his work. In 2009, he was an honoree at the Jewish Learning Initiative on campus at the awards dinner. Additionally, 2009 listed as one of the top 36 under 36 by the Jewish Week. In 2012, Rabbi Sarna received an award from Temple of Understanding with NYU's Imam Khalid Latif and Chelsea Clinton for their work in advancing a new model of integrating interfaith and cross-cultural education on campus life. He was also honored by Yeshivat Har Etzion as an alumnus of the year and also named as one of the top Algemeiner 100 Jewish influencers. So a real honor for us to have you here tonight, Rabbi Sarna. Could you please let us know a little bit, what's life like in Dubai?
Well, thank you very, very much for having me on, and it's a great honor to be here, and just wanted to congratulate you for all the very, very important work that the Zionist Federation does day in and day out. I'm here, very privileged to be here with Rabbi Dr. Elie Abadie, and Rabbi Abadie has been appointed as the senior rabbi in residence in Dubai. And as you can tell from my bio, I'm back and forth between New York and the UAE. Rabbi Abadie, as of 7 weeks ago, moved to the United Arab Emirates and has been leading the community celebration of Hanukkah. I think he's been working 20-hour days. It's been non-stop. And Rabbi Abadie really is a force of nature. I invited him to be on just because so much of his story and his insight are going to continue to build the future of the Jewish community in the UAE, not just the inner workings, but really the way that community can function as a lighthouse, really to the lighthouse community to the region. Rabbi Abadie was originally born in Lebanon and lived in Beirut and escaped with his family as a refugee to Mexico, and at age 18 came to Yeshiva University in New York for his studies, became both a rabbi and a medical doctor, and so it's Rabbi Dr. Elie Abadie, and has served in some of the most prestigious posts, certainly in the Sephardic community in the United States, but even on a global scale, and led the Safra Synagogue for many years on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and is a true boon, not just to the Jewish community in the UAE, but really to the Jewish people as a whole, that Rabbi Abadie is now applying his talents in Dubai. So I'd like to just pass him. It's just past midnight there, so I don't want to keep Rabbi Abadie for too long. But perhaps Rabbi Abadie can share with the ZF audience a little bit about what brought you really back to the region. You're a native Arabic speaker. You're at home in the culture, but what brought you back, and maybe tell us a little bit about Hanukkah. Oh, you're still muted. You're muted.
Sorry, yes. Thank you very much, Rabbi Sarna, for the opportunity, and Paul Charney and all the members of the Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom. It has been a 6 weeks of excitement, thrill, roller coaster, and sleepless nights. That's very correct. I sleep an average of 3 hours a night. And not only because of jet lag, but because just the work doesn't stop between here and there. But I do it wholeheartedly with joy and happiness to see this beautiful small community growing, making its presence, making really footsteps that will create a beautiful community in this new country, in this region. A community a new community in this area of the world, probably in 1,000 years, I would say, certainly in this Arabian Peninsula. Um, Having been born in Lebanon and at age 10, leaving Lebanon, knowing that as refugee, and knowing that most likely I would never come back to live in any of the Arab countries. So when I started seeing the winds changing in this area, and I visited the community together with Rabbi Sarna, and saw how beautiful it is and how welcoming the government is and the people here in the Emirates to the new Jewish community. Uh, when I was offered by Rabbi Sarna and the community to come here to lead the community on the ground and to develop it as much as we can, I did not have to think about it for too long, just for a few days, and I accepted it. Of course, to me, is like closing a circle. From having been born in an Arab country. My first language was Arabic and French. I used to hear in the streets the sounds of the muaddin, of the mosque prayers. In the synagogues, we prayed with our melodies are all based on the Arabic musical scale known as the makamot. So for me to come back and hear the same sounds and smell the same smells and speak the same language is closing a circle, not as a tourist, but as somebody who has come back in a sense to almost to his native land and settle and develop a Jewish community, a community that is no longer in Lebanon and is no longer in 10 other Arab countries where there are no more Jews. Over 1 million Jews had to escape, were persecuted, were expelled from 10 Arab countries. And now seeing that an Arab country is welcoming the Jewish community with open arms, with assistance, with help, with pride, it certainly touched my heart and wanted to have everything to do with it and be part of it. And help develop that Jewish community, to me is like, again, not just closing a circle, but it's like a vindication that finally a Jewish community is reborn again in these areas of the world. So I did not have to think too much about it, and I'm here. As I've mentioned it in the past, I do believe we are at the crossroads of history. And I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to be able to even to give a small grain of whatever I can to make this into reality and to create new beachhead and safe haven for Jews, especially in this area of the world. Having now celebrated Hanukkah for the last 7 nights has been a dream come true to be able to celebrate another holiday, but a holiday where there is the concept of pirsumei nisa, a concept of publicizing the nes, the miracle of Hanukkah in the street, in public, and feeling welcomed, not having to worry about who's walking behind us, not having to worry about any anti-Semitic attack, but the opposite, celebrating it with pride, with joy, and also with open arms that are welcoming us from the people living here. So it has been a miraculous Hanukkah, if I may say, every night another miracle. And living it makes me feel that we are definitely in messianic times. I'm convinced of that. I don't know if we are at the beginning or the just small steps, but we are definitely in messianic times.
Well, thank you very, very much. I know it's past midnight already, but and I know that you've been on your feet for for so long. So thank you very much, Rabbi Abadie, for being with us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I wanted to share a few things with you, my dear audience, a few introductory notes, and then to go into some of the meat of what is really happening and where are things headed and what's the larger significance of what is occurring right now in the United Arab Emirates and really in the region, as well as some key things that global Jewry can do, British Jewry can do, in order to help advance what many are calling and aspiring to, which is a warm peace. First thing I'd like to say is that the Jewish community in the UAE is very much indebted to some of the families, and many of which were Jews from the United Kingdom, who in the early 2000s began opening their homes to each other, celebrating holidays, occasionally, Shabbat together, even before there was, a community up and running. But nevertheless, it took, I would say, a fair amount of courage. I first came to the UAE in 2010, and already when I was looking around saying, I wonder if there's any other Jewish people here. I wonder if there's a community maybe, hiding somewhere. And in 2016, I met the community that had really began the rhythm of the Jewish year, the Jewish calendar. And they told me about the Aders, the Ader family that had been there, and had since moved away. But and there are other families also, but these were just legends to me. And then my guess is that some of the people on this call know some of those families, and I've always proceeded with a sense of really reverence and gratitude for all the work they had done. And the other thing I wanted to say is I feel very indebted to your community because since 2013, one of my very dear mentors was Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. After he was Chief Rabbi, he received an appointment at New York University, where I work, to be a global distinguished professor on the recommendation of Gordon Brown. And I worked very, very closely with him over those years. I, read some of his manuscripts before they went out, and I received all the pieces of wisdom from the master. And when I was appointed in 2019 as Chief Rabbi, he was one of the first people that I told, and he was kind enough to issue a letter almost on the spot right away, a letter of congratulations and endorsement. And in September of this year, he did a little video for a campaign that we were doing at New York University, and he spoke very proudly of the role that I've taken on, and I'm forever indebted to his mentorship and guidance. And I couldn't let this hour go without mentioning his name and extending my condolences to you on his untimely passing. Let me share with you a little bit about some of the key elements, some which are above the surface, some which are beneath the surface, and I think that there will be some things that you might have questions on. I welcome the opportunity to address those questions in the chat. I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. I spent a few years studying in Israel. And then I began to work in 2002 at New York University. And New York University has campuses all over the world. One in London, actually the most popular study away site for New York University is in London. But they're also in Madrid, in Prague, in Florence, in Buenos Aires. And as we got rolling with the 21st century, NYU said, well, we also need a campus in the Middle East. And one natural pick, of course, was Israel, which they decided to do. But they were also looking for another global site in the Arabic-speaking world. And a friendship was kindled between the president of New York University, John Sexton, and the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. And Abu Dhabi became the locus. And I was invited by President Sexton to come, not once the campus was open, but before the campus was open, in January of 2010, to help interview students who were flying in from all over the world to seek admission at NYU Abu Dhabi. And it was very much like selling them on a dream. The campus was not yet built. The school did not yet exist. There was no track record, not a few 100-year track record, not 100-year, not a decade, not a year. It was trying to sell them on a new idea and attract some of the best talent in the world. And that was a transformative experience for me. I was invited, not despite the fact that I was a rabbi, but because I was the rabbi of the university, both from the NYU side. They wanted to signal that if you get NYU, you got to be okay with the presence of Jewish people. But also I would say, and this is very important, this is what I started learning at that point, it was also very important from the UAE side. You see, my stereotype of what Arabs are was really formed through the crucible of conflict. And my image of what Arabs were was intolerant, simple-minded, unsophisticated, violent. These are all the stereotypes that I had either inherited or absorbed. And what I came to learn is that the nature of Emirati culture is actually just the opposite, that baked deep into the DNA of Emirati culture, which goes back to the Bedouin roots of the tribes that compose the UAE, that the idea of tolerance, hospitality, acceptance, openness, that these are central to the ethos of what the country is. And so my first visit to Abu Dhabi at that point was really an encounter, a confrontation between myself, my experience, and the stereotypes that I inherited. And I began to, year after year, when I would visit for these candidate weekends, I would anytime I would go, once the campus got started, I would begin hosting Shabbat dinners and lectures for students, staff, faculty members, and sometimes very often there are people who were not Jewish or who had some kind of Jewish ancestry but not a Jewish identity, who would attend and who would be a part of it. In 2016, I heard that there was a regular Shabbat meeting, a Shabbat minyan meeting in people's homes in Dubai, which is the neighboring emirate from Abu Dhabi. And I visited shortly before Hanukkah. And I remember the topic of the shiur that I gave, of the study session that we had, was where to put the Chanukiah, where to put the menorah. Does the menorah belong outside, as the Talmud says, the first statement of the Talmud, outside, so that many people could see it? Or does it belong inside, indoors, which became the practice, especially in countries where, in lands where Jews were being persecuted just for being Jewish? And I remember we were studying it. There were about 20 people in the home of Ross and Elie Creel. Ross later became the president of the Jewish community. And I remember just suggesting these ideas. It was like touching a raw nerve. There were 20 people in the room, each one from a different country. And each one had their experience of their Jewish identity in their homeland, as well as their new experience of being Jewish in the United Arab Emirates. And I remember this feeling of, it was an emotional experience. People saying, we're here because we've come to a place that is secure and safe, where some of those people did not feel safe in the country that they came from, for economic opportunity. And we're here because we know the government is welcoming us. And at the same time, we still have this concern. We tell our kids not to share the secret that they're Jewish with all of their classmates. We tell them to be mindful of not giving up any clues that might lead other people to kind of catch on. And it was also a time of potential transformation. They said, there might be a time soon that we will feel like we could become more public with our identity. In late 2018, and I've been advising them since 2016, 2018. The community had decided to rent a villa. Actually, one of the villas that I believe it was a British family lived in and had already been hosting certain things, Jewish celebrations in. And that just the rental of that villa on behalf of the community signaled that there was something here to stay, and that this was really the first new Jewish community to be established in the Arab world in a very long time. And in 2018, when it became clear that the Pope was going to come to Abu Dhabi for a visit, and that this would be the first papal visit ever to the Arabian Peninsula, really historic statement, both on the part of the Vatican and on the part of Abu Dhabi. The UAE announced that coming into 2019, this would be the year of tolerance. And what that meant is that they were going to really raise up, spotlight, highlight the religious diversity that currently makes up the United Arab Emirates. In fact, there are about 1 million, 1.2 million Emirati citizens who live in the UAE, and then most of the country, about another 8 or 9 million people are residents, people who have come to work but are not citizens. And there are millions of people who are Christian, Catholic. There are about 1 million Hindus. So very, very diverse population. And they said, it's time that we really begin to highlight this. That previously established a ministry of tolerance, and then they wanted to kind of, anchored by the Pope's visit, create this year of tolerance. And one of the very powerful things that they did is they asked each community to write a short history of their community in the UAE. And I remember seeing an early draft of this history of the Jewish community, and one of the themes of the stories that were in this draft were about kind of privacy, the privacy of the community, and the pictures that were submitted to go in this book. And there was a book that was published called Celebrating Tolerance. This book had pictures, and in the part of the Jewish community, there was not one person who was willing to have their face included in the chapter on the Jewish community. Once the Year of Tolerance got underway, however, and the Pope's visit, at that point, Ross Creel, the president of the community, his face appeared on the cover alongside another 18 or 20 or so faces of other faith communities. It was around that time that we began to think of how could we express gratitude in a meaningful way to the UAE leadership, who was by all accounts going out on a limb in order to facilitate the establishment of this Jewish community. And the historic visit of the Pope had included Jewish people in the audiences, but not really front and center. It was very much a Muslim-Christian encounter. And we discussed a few different ideas, and one idea came up, which was of a historic character, and we decided to advance it, which was to dedicate a Torah scroll to the legacy of the founder of the UAE, Sheikh Zayed. And there had never been a Torah scroll dedicated to an Arab ruler. And we thought, beyond this, what would it look like if we decided to gift it to the royal family, symbolizing the kind of trust that is being placed in the UAE. In our tradition, the Sefer Torah scroll has the sanctity of a human life, and one can violate Shabbat in certain ways in order to save a Sefer Torah, much like you could to save a Jewish life. And I approached the president of NYU and I said, would you advance this idea? And he came back to me and he said, I spoke with His Highness. I read him your email, and he's willing to accept this gift. And sure enough, just about a year ago, November 25th, 2019, was a ceremony during the Year of Tolerance, was a ceremony in the Crown Court where the Sefer Torah was gifted. Actually, just yesterday, it's opportune that we have this. There was footage that was released from that very powerful ceremony, and I hope in another few months there'll be a documentary that will be released that will have kind of the full story. I did not imagine at that point in November of 2019 that anything like the Abraham Accords would be coming. The relations, the way we were, naturally formed, predisposed to talk about Judaism was always in the absence of Israel identity. We kind of kept the Israel part to the side, not wanting to become pigeonholed in that way. And I would say that there was a fair amount of discomfort that came with that. The one time, regular moment where the identities would feel somewhat integrated were on Shabbat, when we would say not only the Tefillah L'Shlom Hamdina, the prayer for the welfare of the state of Israel, but back to back, just like you do in the UK, the prayer for the welfare of the United Arab Emirates, its rulers, and its army. Not a single person who would visit the community and go through those just few minutes, hearing those prayers back to back, would not be struck by it. And in fact, when I was first appointed Chief Rabbi in February of 2019, and the community had asked me to step into this role because I come from a background, my work at the university, I work with all kinds of Jews.
Rabbi, you're muted. Okay. Try it again. You're still muted, Rabbi. Can you hear us? There we go.
How's that? I work with all kinds of Jewish people, and the community wanted somebody who could really reflect their own diversity to step forward as a religious leader on their behalf. And I accepted. I was very honored to do that, and I did not imagine that it would become a very public role. And I'll share this one anecdote with you. It was at a book launch for that. Remember that volume I was telling you about, Celebrating Tolerance, which had the histories of the different religious minorities? There was a book launch in New York, and I spoke on the panel alongside Ambassador Lana Nusseibeh, who is the UAE ambassador to the United Nations. And Ambassador Nusseibeh has a very interesting story. Her father is Palestinian, came to the UK to study in the 60s, and then did not go back to Jerusalem, where he was from. And of course, the Nusseibeh family, that name might be familiar to others, a prominent Palestinian family. And he went instead to the United Arab Emirates and advised Sheikh Zayed, the founder of the country. He was his translator and senior advisor. And Lana, his daughter, is now ambassador to the United Nations. Now, one thing that's unique about the Nusseibeh family, which Lana shared when we were on that panel, is that they were charged 800 years ago with holding the keys to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They're a Muslim family, but because all the Christians were fighting with each other over the church, they said, you know what, let's hand the keys over to a Muslim family. And for the past 800 years, the Nusseibeh family has been the guardians of that. And so Lana said when we were on the panel, for me and my family, safeguarding the ability of other religions to worship is in our DNA. We carry the keys. And I thought I was moved in the moment, but also with the realization that she's an ambassador, she's a public person, and that's one of the stories that she tells. But I was doubly moved by what happened after the panel. I got an email from her inviting me to speak at the United Nations headquarters at a unique event. Mind you, I'd met her once. The event was a meeting, a 50th anniversary meeting of something called the OIC, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. That is the regional forum for all the Muslim or Muslim majority countries around the world. I know they don't all get along, but for the OIC, they tend to come together. And she said it's the 50th anniversary, and during this time, the UAE is the chair. We're chairing the OIC, and we want the theme of the day to be religious tolerance. And so we're going to have Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General. We're going to have the permanent representative of the Holy See of the Vatican will speak. And we thought maybe you could say a few words. You can speak for 5 to 6 minutes. And it was for May 3rd, 2019. And I remember of course, I said yes. And I took a taxi up to the UN headquarters. And when I was walked into the room, I realized that not only was that day the 50th anniversary of the OIC, but it was also coincidentally, or maybe not, maybe providentially, Yom HaShoah. It was Holocaust Memorial Day. And it occurred to me that even though I'd written a speech, that maybe that's not the speech that I need to give. And I walked over to Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, and I said, today is also Holocaust Memorial Day. Do you think I could talk about the Holocaust to this group? And he said, not only can you, you must. And so I did away with the speech that I prepared, and I decided to tell them a story of my wife's family, who was saved during World War II by an Arab doctor named Mohammed Helmi, who lived in Berlin and had my wife's family as patients. And he was a public opponent of Hitler. He lost his job at a prestigious hospital in Germany, but he was allowed to continue in private practice. He took my wife's aunt and hid her in one of the homes that he had to risk his own life. He then got fake conversion papers for her and fake fake marriage documents to a cousin of his who lived in Egypt, on the hopes that she could get an Egyptian passport by dint of that marriage and be able to get out of Germany. In the end, she wasn't able to get out, but she did survive the war because of Mohammed Helmi. In 2012, Mohammed Helmi was recognized by Yad Vashem as the only, to date, the only Arab righteous among the Gentiles. And I shared this story with them because I wanted to try to find an example, a counterexample to the dominant story that's told about Arabs and Jews. And I wanted to use that story, which was a personal story, as also the story of what could be a collective, that we could actually imagine a world where the Tefillah L'Shlom Medinat Yisrael is said back to back for the Tefillah for the safety and security and prosperity of an Arab country. Just a few weeks later, I was invited by Ambassador Yusuf Al-Otaiba. Yusuf is the UAE ambassador to the United States, to serve to an interfaith iftar, which occurs during the month of Ramadan, the holy month for Muslims. And it's at that point that Yusuf kind of made my appointment more public. And then again, I had written a speech. I was at a loss for words. And really all that I shared was the prayer that we say in Dubai for the welfare of the government of the United Arab Emirates. Since that point, I've had the opportunity to meet with many ambassadors who are serving all around the world on behalf of the UAE. I have to tell you, I'm moved, almost to tears of every time I hear or read Mansour Abuhol, who's the UAE ambassador to the UK, who is we met in Dubai, and just as he was being appointed. And if you don't know him, you should know him. I know that he's spoken on panels with Rabbi Mervis and is published in the Jewish Chronicle. I would, strongly recommend that you get to know him and just follow him. He's a man of great wisdom and erudition, and strongly encourage you to do what you can to get to know him. At this point, I think I'd like to just open to the future with unpacking one of the symbols, which I think will become a world monument, a landmark, which follows a decade of great religious intolerance, of attacks on houses of worship of all kind, many fatal, many involving Jews, but also involving Christians and Muslims and others, Sikhs, Hindus. And that's the symbol of the Abrahamic family house, which is being built in Abu Dhabi. It's a $500 million project initiated by the government of Abu Dhabi, running counter to this stream of religious violence that has taken up much of the world's attention since 9/11 and before. And certainly the UK has had its own dealings, of course, with this phenomenon. The Abrahamic family house is a complex with a church, mosque, and synagogue. These are three separate buildings, united underground by an educational center and above ground by a garden. They are all the same height. Each of them face in their traditional orientation. So the synagogue is being built facing Jerusalem. The church is facing east, and the mosque is facing Mecca. And these are being built as living, breathing houses of worship, but also having the capacity to educate and inspire visitors from around the region, and in fact from around the world. The languages in which all the exhibits are going to be Arabic, English, and Hebrew. And this goes back before the Abraham Accords were initiated. And the thing that is unique about this is not that a Gulf country is doing something that's interfaith, but actually that the government is doing something that's interfaith on its own soil, and as a monument, as a model for its own people, and that it is dedicating this kind of resource, which will be fully a part of the landscape of the city. The landscape will unmistakably reflect these values, which are deeply embedded into the culture, into the DNA of the UAE. There's much to expect. This building will be open hopefully towards the end of 2022, and the synagogue part will include not just the synagogue, but also a mikveh, a ritual immersion bath, as well as a Beit Midrash, a place for study. I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that have been issued, and of course, Paul, I welcome you or any of the other moderators to highlight or prioritize. The main business language is both Arabic, but for expats is English, and there are people that are from all over. I mean, I think there are about 250,000 British nationals living in the UAE. So I think it's fair to assume that slightly less than what the Jewish percentage of that population, would be represented, but a decent number of British Jews living there, but also, French, Swiss, Belgian, so really from all over Europe, but also all over the world. But the main language up until recently, until this month, when 50,000 Israelis came to visit, when certainly you heard a lot of Hebrew, but I would say the main language was English.
Fantastic.
People,
very good.
Yeah.
Rabbi Sarna, thank you so much. It's a wonderful introduction, and I'm sure you could continue along those lines for another good couple of hours, but I'm going to try and bring in a few questions, a couple of details that I think people need to try and understand a little bit better, and you can help us cross that culture. We're hugely encouraged by the tolerance that you've shown that there is in the UAE, and by the connection and the bridge that is being built. And we fully understand that that's going to take time for the trust to build between two communities. That will take time. And some of the questions tonight you'll see will touch on that. Could I ask you, how safe is it for Jews in the UAE and Dubai and the rest of the UAE? And particularly, how safe is it for Israelis? As you know, there are many Arab countries, not just and Muslim countries, not just Iran, that will look to exploit Israelis and their lack of security in countries, no less in Arab countries. It'll be much easier for them to perform either terrorist attacks on them or harm Israelis or Jews around. And I think Jews are feeling, and some Israelis are feeling slightly vulnerable with that fact. Could you tell us how safe is it at the moment for both?
Well, as someone who's been living in New York, who lived in New York during 9/11, and also particularly last year, this time where there was a spike in anti-Semitic attacks, one of the things I learned about safety and security, I'm not the expert, there are probably people who are more expert on this phone call, is that there really are two things which are separate things. One is how safe you are, the other one is how safe you feel. And you could feel very safe and not be safe. You could be very safe and feel very unsafe. The fact that 50,000 Israelis decided to visit, whether Iranian saber rattling notwithstanding, I think for itself, Israelis feel safe. Every hotel had options for Hanukkah, and you walk around the mall, the Emirates and the Dubai Mall. You hear a lot of Hebrew, you see kippahs, etc. I think people definitely felt safe, and I think there's good reason to believe that they are very safe. Security there is very tight. That's actually one of the reasons why, when I was talking to Jewish people who were living there, one of the reasons why Jews came to live there. They do not experience anti-Semitism. One of the reasons for that, beyond the just generally open and accepting ethos of the Emiratis, is that the other people who are there are there not on a permanent basis, and you can't really misbehave. So you don't see very much of the pushing around on the playground or calling people epithets, and it's not done as much. So look, I've had the privilege also, I would say, of there have been successive rabbis who've worked under me at NYU. One is Joe Wolfson, who's with me now. The previous one was Gideon Black, both from the UK, and in their own childhood, growing up, and part of their adult life, have had experiences in the UK which have brushed encounters with anti-Semitism, like we've had here in New York, of course, as well. And it sounds surprising, but it's actually one of the reasons why Jews would move there.
That's very interesting. Have you, firstly, has Dubai encountered any open anti-Semitism that you know of? And how free is it for Jews to walk around in Dubai and publicly portray their religious beliefs, such as kippot, such as, we know that the synagogue's been built, there's been a menorah, and everything else, Sukkot. I mean, I'm sure it'd be easier to get some lulavim, maybe. I don't know.
Look, first of all, every time I came, I've never come to the UAE and not worn my kippah since 2010.
Right.
Now, granted, I was coming in for a week at a time, but nevertheless, I never had a single issue. And that was, I came purposely. I was invited as the rabbi. What am I going to do? Not wear my kippah? But look, I think it's even though it sounds surprising, but it's no problem. It's no problem to walk around openly as a Jewish person.
Right. And you haven't heard of any, not that we haven't heard any of openly anti-Semitic comments, remarks, or any attacks. We've only heard tolerance.
Look, let me put it to you in a different way.
Yeah.
In a different way, I'll say that when I'm approached by organizations, either in the United States or Europe or Israel, who are offering to provide security assistance you know, we'll send your bodyguards, we'll send this. The Emiratis take so much pride in themselves securing the Jewish community. It would be offensive to say, let's have this other organization come in. You know, we trust them. That's what our Torah gift was about. That's what our prayer is about. They have our trust. Of course, no government is perfect. No security force is impenetrable. But do I believe that they are doing everything in their power to ensure that Jewish people and others, anybody who comes under their tent is safe? Absolutely.
Fantastic. I mean, that's really encouraging. Let me ask you, Rabbi, there's a question. Typically, in many
Well,
Muslim,
let me just add to you. You know that there was a Yemenite family of 17 people that the UAE airlifted out of Yemen at the height of the civil war, and I believe part of their family was in London. Actually, some of you might know them. They airlifted them out of Yemen because they were under threat and brought them to Abu Dhabi. Can you imagine that?
Amazing. Typically in Muslim countries, I say it's a bit of a generalization, but in many Muslim countries and Arab countries, the education of Jews and Israelis is, to be politically correct, lacking at best, and downright biased and intolerant, and sometimes quite harmful. It goes from obviously countries that have no ties with Israel, and the education is so bad that it's turning an entire youth generation to either hating Israel or finding or Jews. I mean, a lot of the education is about the Yehuda rather than about the Israelis. Could I ask you, do you know what the education now? I assume there will be a change, or there will be some kind of oversight. Will you be able to have any say in the education of the youth in the United Arab Emirates and how they see Israel and they see Jews?
Well, I don't see it as my responsibility to to dictate how the Emiratis should or should not educate their children. What I can tell you is that I think that it was the day after or 2 days after the Abraham Accords were announced, there were already changes in the textbook regarding Israel. Already, all the principals were called in, and they said, "Here are the changes that we're making." By the way, Israel didn't do that. There wasn't the same kind of thing happening in Israel. And changes around how Jews are discussed, that had happened already, many years beforehand. So, would it be great if there were more countries in the region that followed the UAE's model? It would be, and in many countries, I think that there are changes underway. Some are more resistant to change. Some are moving further, quickly, and some have also different educational systems. Now, I've learned from my attending conferences in Abu Dhabi and beyond. I've learned from religious leaders, Muslim religious leaders in other countries in the Middle East and North Africa, just what kind of challenges they face educationally. Part of the challenge they face is actually not about textbooks. It's about who's in their classroom with the textbook. Because you could have a textbook, but you have a teacher. And very often, if you're talking about parts of the world where I know being a teacher anywhere doesn't necessarily pay great, but if you were to take whatever salary a second grade teacher gets in the UK and divide that by 5, and you say, okay, who's gonna take that job to educate children? And you realize, well, it's only people who are radicalized or ideologically motivated who are going to spend the time to be in that classroom teaching for nothing. Well, then you have a different problem. It's not what's on the page; it's about who's reading the page. So it's as much about teachers as it is about textbooks. But that's a very alive challenge. It's a very, very, very alive challenge.
Yeah. Do you foresee? Let's look into the future a little bit. as Alan Dershowitz said, it's hard enough to predict the past, and you want me to now predict the future. So I'm going to ask you to predict the future. How do you see the next 25 years in UAE with regards to relationship with Israel? It might not remain. It might be strained so much because of the Palestinian issue or otherwise. Or do you see the peace flourishing? And the Jewish community, how do you see it going forward, and what do you see it looks like? What do you think it's going to look like?
Well, look, and I'm glad you raised that question, because where it goes depends on us. It depends on you. It depends on all of us. We could treat the Abraham Accords and as a transaction. Muslim land for peace, peace for F-35s. How much money was every side going to get? What's the United States promising? And of course, there are transactional elements, but really, I believe the way we'd like to see it is as a covenant, not a transaction. We should see it in civilizational terms. And that's partly why, most of my remarks tonight I'm not giving you data or critical analysis per se. You can talk to political scientists about that or others. What I'm trying to offer is the stories, because there's always going to be a time where political interests don't align. There's going to be a time when business interests don't align. So does that mean that you're just going to crumple up the piece of paper and throw it out? What we want is warm peace. Warm peace is not just an agreement between militaries, and it's not just an agreement between banks. It's an understanding between people. In order for people to understand each other, they need to tell stories and they need to listen to stories. And there has to be a grand narrative that goes beyond our shared interests, but goes towards shared values and shared future.
I think that's hugely positive, and I would absolutely and totally agree with what you're saying, that this needs to be looked at bigger than it is. This really is historical. The only time we'll know it's historical is when we're looking back at it as history.
Right.
But I think your words emanate. We make of this as we can, and it's pretty much what we do with it. And seeing it as civilizations is a fantastic line, and I think I might just use that, and I might just follow that. This needs to be bigger than it is. This needs to be just bigger than an alliance of security or as you say, business alliance. This needs to be civilizations, cultures, people coming together, and I think that'll just take time, as you say, building the trust. I think that's phenomenally positive. Rabbi, could I ask you another question? Who is, from a Jewish or an Israeli perspective, an influencer in those areas? So how it typically works, as you'll know better than us, in royal fiefdoms, is that you need to know people, and in order to help communities, the Jewish community, or to help people in trouble, because sometimes there might be one or two Jews in trouble there, you need influencers who are able to approach the royals or approach the ruling bodies in the UAE. Do we have influencers in the UAE that have direct communications and direct bridges with people that can make difference?
In the sense that...
And are you one of them?
Well, if you go to visit, everybody got to behave. I know many British people have the experience of going to the UAE, yeah, and not necessarily behaving. Of course, yeah, not Jewish people, of course, but of course there are people. Rabbi Abadie, who you met earlier on this program, has even actually in a very short amount of time come to know many people in positions of influence, and of course there are, but the one thing we learn is that anybody who's there, all the Jewish community that's there, is there as a resident status, not as a citizen. That might change in the future. For now, they're resident. And that means that there's a certain degree of that has to come with an acknowledgement that you're a guest. And certainly if someone comes in as a tourist. And so I think that there has to be a respect for the host culture and for the hosts themselves on a personal basis, and treat people with respect. I have a friend who originally from the United States, then Israel, who came into the UAE and was unhappy with the way someone at the airport was asking him certain questions, and what he thought was not visible to anybody else, he gave him the finger. Excuse my French.
Gosh.
And he got arrested. Now, most countries do have rules about how, what you can say or do to a police officer, and they have tight rules about. They have strict rules about that. So don't give the finger to anybody,
Certainly not, and I think the fact that there is a ministry of tolerance is probably a good address for to try and deal with any issues. I'm sure they could be able to cross culture and deal with issues in a tolerant way. Hopefully, live up to their name. We certainly won't be writing or bouncing any checks in UAE.
Thank you.
Rabbi Yehudah Sarna, it's been an absolute pleasure and a wonderful insight into what it looks like and what it is like there. I mean, the best way for us to know is to go and visit. So I promise to go and visit. Funny enough, tomorrow morning. So let's come and see. So let's go and see what it looks like.
I'll see you there because I'm coming with my family on Saturday night. So we'll be there Sunday evening. And we should get together for dinner.
Sounds great. Sounds fantastic. I look forward to that. Rabbi Yehudah Sarna, go well. Have absolute success in your role in the UAE. All the things that we wish upon ourselves as Jewish people and the nation of Israel, Eretz Israel. You are right at the forefront and help us bridge those gaps. Do not underestimate the position you're in or the authority that you command between the two. So please go ahead, bridge the gap, make the difference, and be the best you can for us, not just for yourself, but for us as well, please. Thank you so much for the time that you took to be with us. Kol hakavod, and happy Chanukah, Chag Sameach, and ever, hopefully one day you'll be in London where we can do this face to face. And then people can ask the questions themselves. So I want to thank all of our audience for joining us tonight. We've got many more Zoom events, webinars to come, but tonight has been special. And a special thank you to you, Rabbi Yehudah Sarna and Rabbi Adil. I want to thank everyone who's joined to keep tuning in to all of our webinars, and hopefully together we can make that difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.